20 years. 20 years of my life sending every dollar I could to Mexico. And on the day I needed a hug from my mother the most, all I heard, I don't know if it was that moment or everything I'd kept quiet before, but something inside me broke forever. Look, my name is Teresa Guzman. I am 45 years old, and I was born in Pachuca and Hidalgo. I lived there until I was 21, when one day I decided to cross over to the United States, thinking I would only stay for a couple of years, save some money, help my mom, and then come back. But you know, you make plans, and life happens. I grew up in a simple house, one of those mud houses that smelled like freshly made tortillas from early in the morning. My dad died when I was 14, and from then on, everything changed. My mom was left alone with us, 3 kids, and I was the oldest. I don't know if that's why I always felt like I had to take care of everyone. She worked selling food on the street, and I helped her chop vegetables, wash dishes, and carry buckets of water. Because in that house, if you didn't help, you didn't eat. I admired her very much. My mom always had a strong personality, one of those women who don't cry in public, who put up with everything, and I wanted to be like her. But I also remember that she was demanding. Nothing was off limits. If you were late, if you spent too much money, if she saw you fooling around, she would tell you to your face. At the time, I didn't see it as a bad thing. I thought that's what mothers did when they scolded you because they loved you. When I finished high school, there was no money to continue studying. I wanted to be a nurse, but the reality was that we needed the money at home. So I started working in a grocery store, 12 hours a day, earning a pittance. Every week I gave everything to my mom and kept just enough for my bus fare. It didn't bother me. It was my mom. She always said that when a daughter helps, God multiplies it. But there came a time when the bills weren't enough. My brothers were still in school, and a cousin who lived in New Jersey told me that I could earn in a week what I earned in a month at the store. At first, I told him I wasn't afraid. I had never even left Hidalgo, let alone crossed a border. But then I started to see my mom's face, worried every day, doing calculations in an old notebook, and I thought, if I don't do it, who will? So I saved up a little money, and with the help of my cousin and a friend, I crossed the border. It was a dangerous journey with coyotes. I'll never forget that trip. I was hungry, cold, and scared in a way I can't even explain. I thought about my mom, her hands covered in scars from so much cooking and washing, and I told myself, it's worth it, Terry. It's worth it. I arrived in New Jersey on a Tuesday in the early morning. I remember because it was February, and the cold penetrated my bones. I didn't speak English, I didn't know anything. But within a week, I was cleaning offices at night and taking care of an elderly woman during the day. I slept 3 or 4 hours a night. But every Friday, I sent my money to Mexico. The first time my mom received that money, she called me crying and said, "My daughter, you got me out of a really bad situation." And I felt proud. Over time, I got more jobs. I cleaned houses, washed dishes in a restaurant, took care of children, whatever. My goal was to send as much as I could. I forgot about myself. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't go out. I didn't spend money on nonsense. If someone invited me to a party, I said no, because I preferred to save to send money to Mexico. And even though I was tired, I was happy to imagine that thanks to me, they had enough to eat. They could pay for school, and my mother could be more at peace. But there were also times when I felt lonely. Life is hard in New York. The winters are endless, the work never stops, and sometimes you feel invisible. I remember coming home to my room. taking off my bleach-stained gloves and crying silently so my roommate wouldn't hear me. And yet, the next day, there I was again, working, because that's the life of an immigrant. You can't let up. After 6 years there, I met a Brazilian man at a party organized by a friend. His name was Marcelo. He was cheerful and talkative, and after so much time feeling alone, I let myself go. He lived in Florida and convinced me to move there. He told me that the weather was better and that there were more opportunities. So I took a chance. The truth is, it was hard at first. Moving to another state is almost like emigrating again. I didn't know anyone. And even though Marcelo had a job, he spent his money on himself. I kept sending money to Mexico as usual, but now with higher rent and fewer jobs, I started cleaning houses again and also worked overtime on weekends babysitting. Marcelo would sometimes say to me, "Terry, why do you send so much money? Things are fine there, aren't they?" And I would get angry because I felt he didn't understand. My mother was there, and I had to do my part. During those years, I got used to my life revolving around sending money. If my mother needed something, I sent it. If a brother got sick, I helped out. I never said no. And yes, I felt good doing it. But I also had less and less for myself. Now that I think about it, I never made plans for my own future. I didn't save for a house. I didn't think about retirement. I just worked and sent money, because my mom always said that when you give, your family remembers you forever. And well, that's what I believed. I always remember one afternoon, just a simple afternoon. But for me, it was like a photograph that I'll never forget. It was a few months before I came here. It was a Sunday, I think it was March, because it was still a little cold in Pachuca. But it was starting to smell like spring. My mom was in the kitchen making mole because she said mole was a holiday meal. And that day, she had gotten a big chicken at a good price. I was sitting at the table, peeling potatoes, and she was talking about everything and nothing, as usual. She asked me if I had seen so-and-so, if I had cleaned my room, if I was going to get my hair cut before the fair. At that time, I still hadn't told her I was thinking of leaving. The truth is, I was afraid of her reaction. My mom wasn't the type to be happy when you went away. She always said that family had to stay together. But I would look at her, with her apron covered in flour, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon, and I felt a tremendous urge to protect her. That day, while she was making the mole, I said to her, "Mom, did you ever dream of moving to another country?" She laughed softly and said, "No, my daughter. I'm like a tree. I've put down roots here and no one can move me." I stayed quiet. Inside, I thought, well, I have to move, even if it's far away. Later, while we were eating, she served me the biggest plate. She always did that. She said I needed strength because I worked so hard. And yes, I did work hard, but I also think it was her way of taking care of me. Sometimes I think that's why it was so hard to leave her. Because despite her scolding and her tough personality, I knew she loved me. It was just the two of us at the table because my brothers were playing in the street. She told me that she had managed to pay my younger brother's school fees and that she was saving up to buy a new stove. I listened to her, but in my head, I was already doing the math. If I sent her more money, I could help her buy it faster. It was a nice, peaceful moment. There was the smell of a mole, the sound of dishes, and my mom talking as if everything was fine. There were no arguments, no complaints. It was just her and me. A few days later, my cousin from the city came to visit. He was the one who gave me the idea of coming here. He told me that he earned dollars there, that he could send a lot more money, that in a year he would have savings. I listened and thought of my mom. When I told her I wanted to leave, it was in that same kitchen. She was cleaning beans and she looked very serious. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just asked, "What if something happens to you, Teresa?" I swallowed that lump in my throat and said, "If I stay here, something could happen to me too, Mom. But if I go, I can help you more." She didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She just said, "You know best, but don't forget where you come from." Those words have stayed with me to this day. The last night before I left, she made me a pot of coffee. We sat outside on plastic chairs, looking at the sky. We didn't talk much. I think we both knew that any words would make us cry. When I said goodbye, she gave me a rosary and said, "Wear it when you're afraid." And I didn't know I was going to be so afraid so many times. When I crossed the border, I wore that rosary around my neck. And every time I worked cleaning houses in New Jersey, every time I came home exhausted and with my hands cracked from bleach, I remembered those afternoons in the kitchen, that café de olla. And I told myself that all the effort was worth it. That someday she would look at me with pride and say, "Mija, you did it." And for many years, that's what gave me strength. Every time I felt alone, every time I wanted to throw in the towel, I thought of my mom sitting at the table, serving me the biggest plate, taking care of me as best she could. I don't know. I believed that there was a strong bond between us, that nothing could break it. But I never thought that bond would change so much over time. When I arrived in New Jersey, I felt like I had been dropped on another planet. It was February. The air was freezing, and the wind cut through to the bone. I had a thick jacket that my cousin had lent me, but even that didn't keep me warm. I had never seen so much snow in my life. And to be honest, at that moment, I didn't think it was pretty. It just seemed like a lot of inconvenience. The first night I slept on a couch in the apartment my cousin shared with 3 other men. The place smelled of damp and reheated food. I didn't complain. I knew I wasn't there to be comfortable. I just thought to myself, tomorrow I'll look for a job. I can't waste any time. By the end of the week, I was cleaning offices on the night shift. A Dominican man who spoke a little Spanish hired me and explained everything quickly. Tomorrow I'll look for a job. I can't waste any time. Within a week, I was cleaning offices on the night shift. I was hired by a Dominican man who spoke a little Spanish and explained everything quickly. Sweeping, mopping, emptying trash cans, cleaning bathrooms, and the pay. For me, it was a fortune compared to what I earned in Mexico. With my first paycheck, I was able to set aside half to send to my mom and still have something left over for my expenses. But the hours were long. I started at 7 in the evening and left at 3 or 4 in the morning. I can still feel the cold of those early mornings in my hands. When we left, I would sometimes stand there for a while, waiting for the first bus and looking at the dark sky. I thought of Pachuca, of the warmth of my mother's coffee, and I felt a hollow feeling in my stomach. Since the night job wasn't enough, I had to start taking care of an elderly Italian woman. Her daughter hired me to feed her, keep her company, and help her bathe. I hardly slept, 3 or 4 hours at most. But I told myself it was only for a short time, while I got things sorted out. The first time I went to send money, my hands were shaking. It was $200. For me at that time, it was a huge amount. I called my mom to tell her. She answered with an emotional voice. She told me she had just had an unexpected expense and that money would save them. That day I felt useful, needed, I thought. This is worth it. Over the months, I took on more jobs. Sometimes I cleaned houses on weekends. Other times I washed dishes at a Mexican restaurant. I would come home to my room because after a while, I was able to rent a small room for myself. And all I wanted to do was sleep. But I forced myself to call Mexico to find out how they were doing. My mom always told me what she had used the money for. The electricity bill, my brother's school fees, fixing the roof. I never told her I was tired. I never thought that if I told her how hard it was, she would worry. So I always painted a rosy picture for her. I'm fine, Mom. I'm working hard. Don't worry. Even though I was exhausted inside, with my hands cracked from bleach and my back aching, there were good days, of course. I remember once they invited me to a park to watch the snow fall. And I thought that maybe it wasn't so bad after all. But those were rare moments. Most of the time, my life was work, transportation, sending money, and starting over. The hardest part was learning that here in the United States, if you don't understand the language, you're invisible. At first, it was all jazz, and hand gestures. I was embarrassed to ask for help. And if they treated me badly, I put up with it. Because as an immigrant, you feel like you can't complain too much. After 2 years, my cousin went back to Mexico. I was left alone. I moved rooms and shared with a friend from Puebla who also worked cleaning. We took turns cooking, and the food was always something quick: rice, beans, eggs. There was never time for anything else. During those years, what hurt me the most was not being there for important dates. I missed my brother's graduations, my mom's birthdays, Christmas with my family. I remember one Christmas in particular. I was cleaning a huge building in Manhattan while my family was already gathered in Pachuca. When I finished, I sat down on a bench outside with my gloves still on and started crying. I thought, is all this worth it? And I quickly answered myself, of course it is. You're doing it for them. That was my life in New Jersey for almost 6 years. Working, sending money, surviving. There was nothing for me. I always thought that what I sent was an investment in my family. If they were okay, I was okay. At that time, I still felt that my mom was proud of me. She would say, "Thank you, my daughter. God will repay you." And those words were like gasoline to keep me going. I didn't need anything else. I believed that one day I would return and she would hug me tightly, telling me that all the sacrifice was worth it. But what I imagined began to change over time. I didn't realize when. When I met Marcelo, I had already been in New Jersey for almost 6 years. He was Brazilian, cheerful, always smiling, and spoke a strange kind of Spanish. But we didn't understand each other. I met him at a birthday party for a mutual friend. I wasn't looking for a partner, but after so many years of feeling lonely, I let myself go. He lived in Florida near Miami. He told me that life was more peaceful there, that the climate was like Mexico's, that I wouldn't have to suffer those horrible winters. And the truth is, I was tired of the cold, the gray streets, and the constant noise of New Jersey. So, after a few months of talking and visiting each other, he convinced me to move. It wasn't an easy decision because I had steady jobs there, and even though they were hard, I was already in a routine. But I thought, well, it's a change of scenery, better weather, and if I can find work there, no problem. I arrived in Florida in the middle of summer. The heat hit my face like I was walking into a sauna. Everything was green, palm trees everywhere, and the sky was a blue I hadn't seen since I left Pachuca. In that sense, it was a relief. But after a while, I realized that I was going to have to start from scratch again. Marcelo worked in construction and earned good money, but it was his. It's not that he didn't help me, but he had his own expenses, his shipments to Brazil to add to his things. So, from the first month, I started looking for work, cleaning houses, first for a company and then on my own. Life here was more expensive than I thought. Rent took up almost half of what I earned, and I kept up the same habit. First, I set aside what I was going to send to Mexico. And then I saw what I had left. If my mom told me she needed more that month, I looked for overtime. I babysat on weekends, washed clothes for neighbors, whatever. Marcelo would sometimes look at me strangely. He would say, "Tere? Why do you send so much money? They're all grown up now, aren't they?" And I would get upset. I would answer, "It's my mom, Marcelo. She raised me, gave me everything she could. How can I not help her?" He didn't understand. And I didn't try to explain much, because I felt that if you hadn't grown up with nothing, you couldn't understand the weight of wanting your family to be well. At first, I liked Florida. The weather, the more relaxed people, Spanish everywhere. I could go to the store and speak my language without any problem. But I also realized that work was different here. The houses were bigger, more luxurious, and the people were more demanding. There were days when I came home so tired that I couldn't even shower. I just threw myself on the bed and that was it. During those years, I began to realize something. I was aging faster. The physical work, the stress, the few hours of rest, it showed on my face, on my hands. And meanwhile, my personal life was at a standstill. Marcelo and I had differences. He wanted to travel, spend money on things for us. And I always said no because I was thinking about the next shipment to Mexico. I remember once we had a big argument. It was December, and he wanted us to go to Brazil to spend the holidays with his family. I told him I couldn't. That my mom had asked me for extra money because they were going to fix the roof of the house. Marcelo said, "You always choose your mom over us." And I replied, almost shouting, "Of course I do, because she always chose me." I don't know if it was true or just something I wanted to believe at the time. But those words came from the bottom of my heart. My routine in Florida became the same as it had been in New York. Work, send money, survive. The difference was that now I was living with someone who, even though he loved me, didn't share my commitment to Mexico. And that started to put distance between us. As for my mom, over the years she got used to me always sending money. She didn't say thank you like she used to. She just told me how much she needed. Sometimes it was for urgent things. Other times it was to help my siblings. I didn't ask questions. I just sent the money. But it became harder and harder. Prices were rising, work was getting tougher, and I felt like my body couldn't take it anymore. I had pain in my back and knees, but I couldn't stop. I thought that if I didn't send money for a month, things would fall apart back home. And here comes something I don't know whether to call anger or sadness. While I was killing myself to send money, they were still spending as if there were no tomorrow. Once, by accident, I saw a photo on social media of my brother showing off a brand new, expensive cell phone. I stared at the screen with a mixture of disgust and confusion. I thought, and here I am, breaking my back for this. But then I told myself that I shouldn't think that way, that I was doing it out of love, not to control how they spent their money. Even so, something in me began to change. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in the living room with my laptop on my lap, checking my accounts. I had had a tough week, cleaning 2 big houses, doing extra work babysitting, and I still had 2 rent and utility bills to pay. I was tired and my back hurt. But that day I decided to call my mom to see how she was doing. When she answered, I could hear the TV in the background and my nephews playing. I said hello, asked about everyone, and as always, she started telling me about all the expenses she had had, the electricity, the gas, some medications. I was already mentally calculating how much more I would have to send than I had planned for that month. And then it happened. I don't remember exactly how the sentence started, but I do remember how it ended. My mom said, "Teresa, you never did enough." At first, I thought I'd heard her wrong, so I stayed quiet, waiting for her to correct herself, to say that wasn't what she meant. But she didn't repeat anything like that. She said that if I had really wanted to help more, I would have sent her money to fix everything that needed fixing, that other daughters in the United States sent more. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach after 20 years. She had never said anything like that to me before. I stayed silent for a few seconds, feeling my voice catch in my throat, and she kept talking without noticing or caring that she was tearing me apart inside. I said quietly, "Mom, what do you mean I never did enough? Mom, what do you mean I never did enough?" And she replied in that cold tone she used when she was upset. "Well, yes, my daughter, look, I appreciate what you send. But there's always more to do." Something inside me broke. I didn't yell at her. I didn't argue. I just said I had to hang up because I had work to do and ended the call. I closed the computer and stared at the wall. The tears started to flow. It was a different kind of cry, not the cry of exhaustion or nostalgia. It was as if the weight of those 20 years had suddenly fallen on top of me. Everything I had done, the freezing early mornings in New Jersey, the overtime in Florida, the aches and pains in my body, the Christmases I spent alone, the birthdays I missed, the cold meals I had to eat on a street corner, everything. And in that moment, I realized that none of it mattered to my mother. I thought of all the times I had said there was nothing I could send her. The trip I didn't take with Marcelo, the clothes I didn't buy even though I needed them, the dentist I didn't go to because I had to send extra money that month. And I asked myself, what for? I sat there motionless for I don't know how long. Marcelo came in and found me sitting there with my eyes swollen. He asked me what was wrong, and when I told him, he was silent. Then he said, "Tere, you see, I told you didn't have to send so much." He didn't mean it maliciously, but it hurt all the same because at that moment, I didn't need a teledige, I needed a hug. I didn't sleep that night. I spent it remembering things my mother had said to me. "Thank you, my daughter. God will reward you. You are my pride and joy. I don't know what I would do without you, and now you've never done enough." The next day I got up to go to work, but my heart wasn't in it. I arrived at the house I had to clean and could hardly concentrate. Every time I bent down to pick something up, I felt like it wasn't worth it, as if suddenly all meaning had been erased from what I was doing. In the days that followed, I distanced myself. I didn't call her as often, and when I did, we didn't talk much. She didn't ask me why, and that's what hurt me the most, that she didn't notice or didn't want to notice that her words had hurt me. A couple of weeks later, my older brother sent me a message asking for money for something urgent. He didn't even explain what it was for, and that's when I realized it wasn't just my mom. They had all gotten used to me always solving their problems. That phrase, "You never did enough," kept echoing in my head. And I started to think that maybe she had always felt that way, but she had never said it out loud. I wondered if she had ever seen me as anything more than the daughter who sent money. After that call, I spent weeks on autopilot. I worked, cleaned, smiled at customers, but inside I was falling apart. I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. You never did enough. It was as if it had been tattooed on my forehead. I know myself. When something really hurts me, I keep it to myself. I'm not one to talk about my problems, because I was always taught to endure pain. But this time, I couldn't even swallow without my chest burning. I cried in secret. When Marcelo was out or asleep, I would lock myself in the bathroom, sit on the floor, and let it all out. It wasn't pretty crying. It was crying out of rage, of helplessness. I cried for everything I missed out on, for all the times I got sick and didn't go to the doctor because we had to send extra money that month, for the winters I worked with wet feet, for the hours I spent waiting for a bus in the early morning, eating whatever I could find. And now, after all that, it wasn't enough. I was angry, yes, angry at her, at my brothers, at myself. Because who told me to take on that responsibility as if it were an obligation? No one put a gun to my head. I did it because I wanted to. But I wanted them to recognize it, even if it was just a little bit. I started to remember things I had overlooked before. Like the times I sent money to my mom and she never said thank you. She just told me what she was going to spend it on and asked if I could send a little more for this or that. Or the times when I called, she didn't ask me how I was. She just told me about her problems and expenses. And I also felt guilty, because even though what she said hurt me, I knew that things weren't easy there, that my mom also worked hard, that she's had a life full of hardships, and that maybe for her saying, "You never did enough," wasn't meant to hurt me, but it did. One night, after a very long day cleaning 3 houses, I sat on my bed and stared at the ceiling. Marcelo asked me if I was going to send the money this month, and for the first time in 20 years, I hesitated. I told him I didn't know, that maybe I would send less. He looked at me as if he didn't believe me. "It's not a sin to think about you and Tere," he said. And that phrase ran through my head all night. I didn't know how to think about myself without feeling selfish. In my mind, every dollar I didn't send was like taking a piece of food away from my mom. That's how I had programmed myself. A few days later, they called me from Mexico to tell me there was a family reunion and to connect via video call. I did, and there was my mom surrounded by my siblings, laughing, eating. I was happy to see her so happy, but it also made me angry because I wasn't there, and not because I didn't want to be, but because I was working so they could be there. And even then, I wasn't enough. After that call, I locked myself in my room and wrote down everything I was feeling in a notebook. I wrote things I would never dare to say to her face. That it hurt me that she didn't appreciate my sacrifice. That I felt used. That I was tired of being responsible for everyone. I laughed as I wrote, and when I finished, I tore up the pages and threw them away. I didn't want to hold on to that resentment, but I didn't know how to let it go either. At work, clients asked me if I was okay because they could see I was distracted, and it was true. I cleaned out of habit, as if my body was there, but my mind was somewhere else. I thought about what would have happened if I had never left. If I had stayed in Mexico, I would have had children, a house of my own, a less tiring life. And then another truth hit me. I had lived more for my mom than for myself. During those days, I started saving a little money for myself. something I had never done before. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And although I felt guilty, I also felt a strange lightness, as if I were finally giving myself permission to exist outside of obligation. But the wound from those words remained open, because it wasn't just what she had said, but what it meant. That in her eyes, everything I had done was never enough. There were nights when I dreamed of saying to her, "Mom, my youth, my strength, my years," and even that wasn't enough. But I would wake up knowing that I wouldn't, because even though it hurt, I still loved her. And that's the hardest part. Someone wanting you to hurt yourself without realizing it. After that call and everything that came after, something changed in me. And it wasn't a small thing. It was as if I had turned off a switch. I kept sending money, yes, but not with the same enthusiasm. Before, when I made a transfer, I felt proud. Now I just felt tired. I sent just enough. And if it wasn't enough for everything they asked for, I simply said I couldn't. I don't know if they noticed the difference. My mom never said anything, but the calls became less frequent. Sometimes weeks would go by without us talking. I didn't reach out to her, and she didn't reach out to me much either. That distance hurt at first, but then I got used to it. I realized that, for the first time in years, I had some peace of mind. Things changed with Marcelo, too. He was happy that I was saving more money for us, but we already had a lot of differences that had built up. He wanted to travel, go out more, and I didn't feel like it. Something inside me had broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. A few months later, we broke up. It wasn't an ugly fight. We just went our separate ways. And there I was, alone again, in Florida, with my job and my thoughts. That's when I started to realize everything I had lost in those 20 years. I'm not just talking about money or opportunities. I'm talking about my life as a woman. I never had children because I always said it wasn't the right time, that I had to help my family first. I never bought a house because I always prioritized sending money to Mexico. I didn't have any savings for retirement, nor a plan for myself. Everything I earned, I invested in the lives of others. And when I stopped to think about it, I was scared. Scared of growing old and being alone, without a place of my own, without anyone to look out for me. I asked myself, who is going to take care of me if I've always taken care of everyone else? There were days when I felt very resentful. I looked at photos of my siblings, with their families, with their children, with their homes. And here I was, working, going back to a rented apartment, cooking something quick and going to bed alone. And although part of me wanted to be happy for them, another part couldn't help thinking that all of that was partly built with my effort. It hurt me to accept that to them, I was like an ATM that occasionally connected via video call. At work, they also noticed my change. Before, if they asked me to cover an extra shift, I always said yes. Now I was starting to say no. I was allowing myself to rest on a Sunday, to stay home and watch a series, to go for a walk on the beach. And although that made me a little happy, it also came with guilt. I remember once I went to a restaurant alone, something I never did. I ordered a dish I loved, and as I ate I thought, this is for me, no one else. And instead of feeling completely happy, I was overcome by a strange sadness. It was as if I was learning too late to give something to myself. As for my mom, our relationship was scarred. We didn't fight, there were no yelling matches, but we no longer had that connection we once had. When we talked, it was more out of obligation, And although it's hard for me to say, I no longer trusted her to see everything I did for her. I think that phrase, "You never did enough," erased many of the good things we had built. I also started thinking about moving back to Mexico. Not because I wanted to live there again, but because I felt that if something happened to me, at least I would be close to my people. But then I remembered that even if I was close, that didn't mean they would take care of me. And that thought hurt even more. During those months, I learned something the hard way. When you're always there for everyone, people get used to it. And when you're not there anymore, they don't always ask why. They just look for someone to replace you. It wasn't easy to accept that. It took me time, sleepless nights, conversations with myself in front of the mirror. But one day, while cleaning a huge kitchen in one of the houses I was working in, I looked at my reflection in the oven and said to myself, "Terry, enough is enough. You gave everything you had. Now it's your turn." It wasn't a radical change from one day to the next, but it was the beginning. I started saving little by little, thinking about what I wanted for the next few years. I realized that I still had a life and that I didn't want to spend it paying off a debt that never existed. Because, in the end, I understood that I didn't owe anyone anything. What I gave was out of love. But that love doesn't oblige me to keep emptying myself until I have nothing left. Over time, I understood that there were two paths. Continue as before, carrying the entire weight of my family until my body and mind said enough. Or let go. And letting go didn't mean stopping loving them, but rather stopping putting them before myself. At first, that idea seemed almost impossible. It was as if I were betraying my mother. I kept telling myself, if I don't help her, who will? But then I realized something. My siblings were no longer children. Each of them had their own life, their own job, their own responsibilities. And even though I wanted to believe otherwise, they could get by without me. Accepting that was like taking a weight off my shoulders. It didn't disappear overnight, but I started to breathe differently. One day, after weeks of not calling my mom, I decided to dial her number. Not to argue or complain, just to say hello. She answered, "Don't worry," as if nothing had happened. We talked for a while. She told me about the neighbors, the church, a grandchild who had been born. She didn't mention money. Neither did I. And that's when I understood that if I didn't bring it up, she could live without asking for it every time. It's not that our relationship went back to the way it was before, but I no longer felt that burning sensation in my chest every time I talked to her. I had accepted that my mom was the way she was, that her words weren't always going to be kind, and that I couldn't change that. The only thing I could change was how I took it. I started giving myself permission to do simple things that I hadn't even thought about before. Taking a day off without feeling guilty, buying nice shoes for work without thinking that I should send the money to her instead. Going out to lunch with a friend and paying without feeling bad. I signed up for an English class at the public library. I always said I didn't have time, but the truth was that I never made time for it. At first, it was really hard. I felt clumsy, but every time I learned a new word, I felt alive, like I still had room to grow. One Sunday I went to the beach alone, walked along the shore, felt the water on my feet, and said to myself, "This is life, Terry. Don't forget yourself again." It was a simple moment, but it made a big impression on me. I realized that I didn't need big luxuries to feel good. What I needed was time for myself and the freedom to not always be thinking about the next transfer to Mexico. Of course, I still send money, but now it's different. I do it when I can, not when they demand it. If I have extra, I send it. If not, I don't. And when they ask me, "Why don't you send more?" I answer without fear, "Why do I have to live too?" Sometimes I think I wish I had come to this conclusion sooner, that it would have saved me many years of wear and tear. But then I tell myself that everything happens when it has to happen, and that it doesn't do me any good to live in the past. My mother never apologized for what she said that time, and I don't expect her to. That's another thing I learned. Not all wounds are healed with forgiveness. Some are healed when you decide to stop opening them up. Today, at 45, I don't have everything figured out. I keep working hard. I keep paying rent. I keep thinking about what will become of me in a few years. But I no longer live with the burden of feeling like I have to save everyone. Now I understand that if I don't save myself, no one else will. I've talked to other people who, like me, have been in this country for years sending money to their families. And many have told me that they've also heard that phrase, "It's not enough." It makes me sad because of the weight those words carry. But it also gives me the strength to tell them not to let themselves be consumed, not to waste their whole lives on the idea that one day they will receive recognition that may never come. If this experience has taught me anything, it is a clear lesson. Helping others is beautiful, but you can't help at the expense of your own life. Love for your family should not be a sentence. And although there are still days when I feel like falling back into the same pattern, I remind myself of the night I hung up that call and felt my heart being emptied. I don't want to go back there. Not anymore. Today I look forward. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Mexico to stay or if I'll continue in Florida. What I do know is that wherever I am, I want to live for myself, without guilt. If you've made it this far, you already know my story, and I'm going to tell you something that took me 20 years to understand. You can give everything you have, and still, for some people, it will never be enough. And it's not that you're not worth it. It's just that sometimes other people's expectations are a bottomless pit. It took me a long time to realize that I couldn't go on living like that I couldn't stop existing as a woman, as a person, because I was always solving other people's problems. And the worst part is that I got myself into that cycle. No one forced me. I did it because I thought that was how you showed love. But now I understand that true love shouldn't ask me to destroy myself to sustain it. I look back and see everything that happened. The cold in New Jersey, the early mornings in Florida, the aches and pains, the years without vacations, the Christmases and birthdays I spent alone. And of course, it hurts. But I also give myself credit because I did that. Because I was able to stand firm in a country that is not mine, learning everything from scratch and still standing tall. If you're listening and you're in that situation, I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. Help, yes. But don't forget about yourself. Save a little bit for yourself. Take care of your health, your time, your dreams. Because in the end, when you can't do it anymore, many of those who received your help will go on with their lives, and you'll be left with nothing. Don't feel guilty for setting limits. You're not a bad daughter or a bad person for thinking about yourself. On the contrary, when you're well, you can give more. But if you empty yourself, if you have nothing left, what are you going to give? I know that the culture we grew up in teaches us that children have to give everything for their parents. And I'm not saying that it's not nice to help. I would continue to do so when I can. But I'm not going to let that take away my whole life anymore, because I also give. Today, my relationship with my mom is calmer, although different. I no longer expect her to say thank you or acknowledge everything I've done. I understand that's not going to happen, and I've learned to live with it. It's not easy, but it's healthier than continuing to wait for something that never comes. If this experience has taught me anything, it's that we need to talk more among ourselves, those of us here in the United States, about what it really means to live and work here, so that our families understand that money doesn't grow on trees, that every dollar we send home represents hours of physical labor, exhaustion, and sometimes tears. That's why I invite you, if you identify with my story, to speak up and not keep it to yourself. If you have experienced something similar, share it in the comments. I want to know where you are listening from, whether you are from Mexico, Central America, or South America. And if you have ever felt that no matter how hard you tried, someone told you it wasn't enough. And if you are just starting your life here, have just arrived, and are thinking about sending money, do it. But be careful. Learn from my story. Don't neglect your future completely. Make yourself a priority too. I'm going to keep telling stories like this because I know I'm not the only one. And if you want to hear them, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Here we speak without embellishment, without making things up. Just the truth of what we immigrants experience, because our lives are not just achievements and dollars sent home. They are also the absences, the sacrifices, and the silences that no one sees. And those stories deserve to be told. So thank you for listening. And remember, helping others is an act of love, but loving yourself is too.